Police Minister Bheki Cele says 12 people of interest have been identified. This after 20 trucks were torched in 3 provinces in the space of 5 days. For more on this, we're now joined by the Executive Director of the African Center for Security and Intelligence, David Africa, South African Transport and Allied Workers Union General Secretary Jack Mazibuko, and the United Truck Drivers Association's Philip Mukwande. Gentlemen, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. Let me start with Satawu and your response to the Minister's utterances today. He says this is not necessarily a random act of criminality, but he calls it an isolated cowardice act, be it linked to service delivery or economic sabotage or labor disputes. These people are using violence to address a matter that should be addressed as opposed sitting around the table. What's your view on that?
No, thank you very much, and good evening to you and your viewers at home. Firstly, Satawu, we will want to welcome the report of the Minister, and then we think the critical analysis that the Minister has made, somehow we do agree with him, and we've been on record all along that in our view, it is not only about labor dispute issues, but there's more to it. There's an element of criminality that the police and the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Home Affairs need to look into it and try to find a solution to a problem.
Ms. Africa, the attacks are coordinated, the Minister says, targeting specific routes, a gateway to Africa. They are organized. We can talk about the degree of sophistication, but they are organized. Is that a signal of some degree of vulnerability as far as national security is concerned?
Hi, good evening, Thabo. I think it's important that we sort of retain some perspective on these developments. Not everything constitutes a national security crisis, and South Africa has a long history of all sorts of violent ways of expressing, dissatisfaction around social and political issues. So that is the first point I'd like to make. Obviously, the fact that it is organized, as the Minister says, is a matter of concern because, you also can't say it's organized and sporadic. It's organized and it shows a broader vulnerability in the sense that people find the opportunity and the means to execute well-organized attacks of this sort. This is just one example. I mean, there are other forms of violence, emerging all the time, not just in the transport industry, but in other spheres of economic activity as well. So it is a concern that there are not just security vulnerabilities, but political vulnerabilities. Because the question we have to ask ourselves is, why do these things keep on happening? Because it's not isolated. It's not sporadic.
Yeah.
It takes a different form every now and then. But the bigger issue is, what in the political situation, what is that makes people to engage in these kinds of activity?
Mr. Philip, have any of your members been affected by this latest bout of attacks?
Good evening, Thabo. Good evening to your viewers. Thabo, I can say most of our members has been attacked. And apparently when it happens, everybody puts a blind eye to it. Now that it is affecting locals, remember, it is also now affecting locals. Because when it started happening, they were targeting foreigners. In the companies, they knew that they employ foreigners. Mostly, those companies, they are also owned by foreigners. So now that it is affecting locals, everybody is now feeling the heat. When we spoke, I think last year, we said it out that this thing is going to harm everyone who is involved in putting a blind eye. Now, get me right. You cannot shoot randomly. You cannot ban trucks randomly. How do you tell that the truck that you are shooting at, a foreigner is driving it? It's very difficult. You can only tell when the truck stops and you hit the person directly, when you can talk to him, or when you can physically abuse the person. I once told Sipho Zungu when he created ATDF to say the animal that you are feeding today will come back and bite you. And where is Sipho Zungu now? There is Sifiso Nyati right now. You can even run away and say, no, it's not happening, and we are not in charge, we are not doing this. But by then, look, everybody blames ATDF, and we all now blame ATDF. Who is ATDF? Who is sponsoring ATDF? Who is giving them technical advice to tell that you can attack on this angle or in this province at this particular time? I'd love to support what David is saying. It might take time to realize that it is now a security threat to South Africa. It is also affecting the economy itself. Look at the exchange rate of rand right now. Look at South African ports right now. You can see how much this thing is affecting not only South Africa, it is beginning to affect the whole of Southern Africa now.
Yeah. And the fact that then, Jack, that this is beginning to look like, according to the minister, economic wars. He says maybe even a touch of industry wars, or maybe it's turf wars of some sort. And we are talking primarily coal trucks that have been affected, and I think it's chrome from that briefing as well. So speaking that, it's more around the mining of certain natural resources. How does Satawu view that, and where do you locate that particular tension?
But I think on that part, as Satawu, you will learn that this truck attack started way back in 2018. And when it started, it was more about workers advancing an employment of the foreign that are employed by the employers. In a way, they were suggesting that workers are dividing the South African employees because the trucking industry is not a scarce skill. And then Satawu's position on that was that we really need to look at this matter. We need to find a solution to a problem. And then we have developed a tax team that consists of 4 spheres of government, which is the Department of Transport, Department of Police, and the Department of Foreign Affairs. We were trying to resolve the issue, but where the problem is, it is inability of government to make follow-up, particularly on the critical decision that has been taken to cap the situation. Now, the situation went as far as now been seen as if it's a turf war. It might be turf war, but if you look at the background where it started, you will clearly tell that the government have wasted time. Now the situation is getting out of hand. But our fear is that at the expense of these truck attacks and the torturing of trucks, the lives of ordinary employees, be it South Africans or the foreigners, it's at risk. The economy, it is at risk. Yeah. And we've been indicating that in South Africa we have 2 types of the foreigners in our understanding. We have the asylum seekers, people that are here because they ran away from their countries and they got document to be in the country, and by law those people, they are allowed to work in the country provided their employees comply with the provisions of the Act. And we have undocumented foreigners. Those are the people that we said the Department of Labor must work around the clock to make sure that they cap those employers that are employing those undocumented foreigners. Yeah. If you read the report of the minister, he did mention that about 100 employers has been found employing the foreign drivers. But it's not specific as to if you know who are these employers, why are you not applying the law? Because South Africa is a country of law.
This lack of specificity, though, is also challenged because if you look at 21 trucks burnt, it's only 4 that are said to have been driven by foreign nationals. So how would you link the issue of foreign nationals to just 4 and at least a good 17 of them would have been driven by locals?
That is why we've been saying that if we had the 4 spheres of government that are working together, definitely we would have kept the situation from its beginning. Like you are correctly saying that my colleague on Arayan is right. People that are torturing the trucks and burning them, it is no longer about workers' issue. It's about advancing a criminal activity. But where is our intelligence when all these things happen? We are worried that our police minister becoming now a reactionary. When there is an incident, that's when they start to investigate. In our understanding, you investigate in order to prevent an incident to happen. So all the time we get this rhetoric report that says we have arrested this number of people, we know who are these people. But if you read that report, none of these people has been arrested, none of them has been sentenced.
We are still with the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Security and Intelligence, David Africa, South African Transport and Allied Workers Union General Secretary, Jack Mazibuko, and the United Truck Drivers Association's Philip Mukwande. Let's come back to this, David. 12 people of interest is what we have identified. This after 5 days of torching. One, we don't seem to be able to collect robust enough intelligence data to be able to intercept at least these things before they deteriorate to this level. So we don't have preemptive measures. Or maybe we just don't have preemptive measures when it comes to these issues of tracking. Maybe we are doing better in other instances. But it could worry one to say, how robust is our intelligence community in coming up with the correct measures to avert, should there be a national threat?
It seems that the number 12 is quite a popular number, that these conspirators
always coming in 12. Yeah, I know previously we also said during the unrest there were 12 instigators, so to speak.
I mean, one is waiting for the trial of the 12. You know, in the apartheid years, you would have the trial of the MK15 or this. But to be serious now, look, as a matter of fact, we as outsiders, observers of the situation, we obviously don't know to what extent the intelligence services might have prevented another 30 attacks. I mean, you know, it might sound incredulous, but as a matter of fact, we don't know, and they would not be reporting on it. But be that as it may, the attacks that are occurring and recurring, because it's not just happened once, is obviously a matter of great concern. And the fact that they have recurred on the one hand, and on the other hand, that they have spread both geographically and in terms of the targets, you know, because you have moved from foreign-owned trucks or foreign drivers to a more general disruption of the trucking industry. This is obviously a matter of concern, and quite clearly there one would expect that, you know, there would have been more specific intelligence to prevent that sort of thing. The problem we have, I mean, one of the many problems we have is that, you know, our intelligence services, and not just the police, are coming out of a very difficult period. And I think by difficult, I mean more than 10 years of being degraded, you know. What we have not done very clearly, because it's shown by the number of incidents of violence, by our failure to deal with a whole range of sets of violence and crime, is that we have failed to develop intelligence capability that is strategic, that has good ground coverage, and that is predictive and preemptive. Yeah. I mean, it's clear. I mean, there was the the report in 2021 after the riots, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, which clearly pointed this out. But there's been a number of other incidents subsequent to that.
Yeah.
And then there's the general failure to deal with organized crime, which is a reflection on the ability of our intelligence services and maybe more particularly crime intelligence, which has been in tumult with leadership changes and disruptions, suspensions, and so on. So our problem is that we have not developed intelligence capability. I mean, these institutions are there, they are budgeted, money is being allocated to them year after year, taxpayers' money. And yet we are not seeing, the fruits of this investment by the state. I mean, the state is investing a lot of money in this, and the question we have to ask, two questions. One, why is this capability not being developed? I mean, a necessary existential capability. Every country needs good intelligence. South Africa is no exception to the rule. Two, the people who are in leadership positions, from ministers down to heads of departments, why are they not being held to account for failing to develop these capabilities? I mean, if I am appointed as a lowly manager in a company, one of my duties is to develop the capabilities of the company. I mean, a shop or whatever, appoint the right people, deploy the right systems and so on. Otherwise, I'll be fired. I'll be dismissed. So we have failed with the mission of intelligence capability development.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads to this question. One of our viewers, David, is asking this question on Facebook, saying, with this lack of intelligence capability, if we can, we'll try and put it up. But essentially, the question says, the outside world, are they looking at us and this lack of capability in terms of intelligence gathering? And they are seeing this and they're thinking, hey, it's quite easy to commit crimes here and we can walk free. It says the motive is known by perpetrators. Terrorist groups are seeing how easy it is to commit crimes here and they think they can come in and walk free. That's Tabang Sidwell and Cele getting in touch with us there on Facebook. Is that something that's a possibility, that there are others who are busy studying these gaps and this vulnerability and think they can take advantage of it?
No, it's not a possibility, it's a reality. I mean, organized crime syndicates of all sorts. There was a big report released about a year or so ago by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime that shows the depth and the extent of organized crime in the country. I mean, these syndicates exist in order to make profit out of crime. Obviously, they are looking at the situation, like anyone who's studying a market, because to them these are markets, and they are saying, is it a difficult market to penetrate or is it easy? What are the challenges? What are the gaps and so on? So they are looking at this. But of greater concern is the fact that states are looking at this. Other states who are thinking of how can we influence South Africa? How can we weaken South Africa? How can we direct South Africa in ways that are beneficial to ourselves and not to South Africa? They have armies of people who are deployed to study the weakness of other states. And they look at us, and I mean, obviously one of the indicators of how an intelligence community performs are the extent to which the national security institutions are able to prevent recurring incidents of crime. And if we have failed there, they must be almost, licking their lips in a sense that it shows vulnerability.
It's been a dominant story throughout the day today as the number of torch trucks continues to rise. Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, briefing the nation earlier on steps that are being taken to deal with this particular matter. And we are still joined by Executive Director at the Africa Center for Security and Intelligence, David Africa, South African Transport and Allied Workers Union General Secretary, Jack Mazibuko, and United Truck Drivers Associations, Philip Mukwande. Philip, let me come to you, especially to what Jack was raising earlier on, the interministerial task team that it has been set up, including premiers that are supposed to lead that in the various provinces. Why is it not working in your view, and what needs to happen for that structure to work?
Tabo, you know what happens is if you leave the affected people in your structures, you end up getting what you want to hear instead of what is on the ground. They actually supposed to be involved in the affected party, meaning, I mean, they have to also involve foreign nationals. Remember, when this whole thing started, it started because locals were saying foreigners are taking our jobs, which is something that they were all vying for. They were all targeting foreigners. Now that the foreigners are being affected, they should also include the affected people in their discussions. Whatever they need to find out, they need to find out from the affected part of the whole thing. You cannot ask someone who is attacking people to say, who is doing this? They will tell you, we don't know. Because they are the ones who are doing everything. They are the ones who are also managing how to attack and when to attack. But if you include the people who are also affected, you end up finding everything that is hidden, every small detail that is happening in the highways, along N3, be it N12, N1. Now, also, remember, we are employed by the employers who have registered their companies in South Africa.
Yeah.
They should also be involved, because these are the people that are also creating some scenarios here and there. Remember, locals are saying, they started saying, we don't want foreigners to be employed. And who is employing foreigners? Who is allowing foreign nationals to pass through? Get this right. There is no way that one can claim that we have got illegal foreigners in South Africa. How did they get into South Africa? I remember they have transformed and changed a lot of things by the borders. I know it is possible. But who do we blame? Are we supposed to be blaming the people who are in South Africa, or are we supposed to be blaming the authorities that are letting these illegal immigrants into South Africa? We cannot blame a person who is already in South Africa. How did he enter? And by the end of the day, if, like I said, if we are to put our heads together and decide to talk and involve everyone, I think and I believe a resolution will be found.
Right.
But as long as one is chasing the other like a rat and mouse game here, we are not going to get a solution.
Jack,
that's what I think.
Sorry, I'm bringing Jack in. Jack, are we leaving some people behind? Because this issue of, for example, employers who are not abiding by the labor, what you call them, limitations in terms of people, it's going to be a scarce skill, there's going to be this percentage of foreign nationals employed and so on and so forth. It's something that I think Gavin also of the other association has been raising, that employers are just not sticking to this. So are we not bringing employers on board in this interministerial setup that we are putting up? Are we bringing foreign national voices into that conversation, or is it just us talking amongst ourselves?
No, I think, like I indicated earlier on, Satawu is the country of law. I think in this tax team that has been established, the employers were part of that tax team, because that tax team consists of the industry unions and the employers within the industry. But what we are lacking in terms of dealing with this issue, in our view, we think we as workers, we are also playing a role by not uniting to fight and expose these employers that are dividing us, because it is the same employers at some point who are employing this undocumented foreign for one reason and one reason only, to divide workers, to pay these employees a low salaries that is outside the collective agreement that the parties have agreed upon. Secondly, you will understand that the road freight industry is a dominated industry that is owned by a private sector. Now, it's the same as the security, it's the same as the retail sector. Now, if the government is not developing a clear policy that will regulate the role of the private sector, in this particular companies like road freight and the security and the cleaning, we'll have a problem. So we need also to have a policy in place. The other thing that the government is making mistake on is to outsource and privatize even the state-owned entities. Once they privatize them, they neglect them. They are no longer monitoring them the way they were doing while they were still within the state. That's the part that we are looking at, we need to correct. But when it comes to the interministerial committee, employers in the road freight has been invited. I know for sure that my colleagues from other side, they were also invited to play a role, and they've made submissions. But the question is, you make those submissions, you take those resolutions. Who is going to implement those resolutions? Because the four spheres of state are not working together to help the problem that we are confronted with.
All right. David, I have some WhatsApp messages. There's one particularly that I want you to address, but let's read all of them. 072-110-5584. Bheki Cele is on record every time some serious crime takes place, like the 2021 riots in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. X number of suspects are on investigation. The truck burning is another incident, and he's ring the riots. Nothing will come of the investigations. Victor Mudlide. Charlie Naturena saying the motives are unclear but could be linked to economic frustration, political opportunism, or criminality. These torchings cost millions, disrupt supply chains, and endanger lives. Immediate action is needed. Increase police presence, enhance penalties, and address the root causes. Here's one from Anonymous. It's not just a time, it's just a matter of time before South Africa burns. Only the beginning. Private companies are purposely igniting these fights for profits. That's what I want you to address there, David. How possible is that this could be something that is actually being sponsored by private companies themselves?
Babu, you know that politics in South Africa, and protest politics included, has over the last 15 years or so become increasingly integrated with economic interests and organized crime. So what you have is, when you look at an incident or a series of incidents like that, it's difficult to disentangle these interests, which are organized crime interests, political interests, and economic interests, business interests. And one of the reasons that we have this integration of these various interests is because you have a situation where the state has gradually over time lost its legitimacy on the one hand in the eyes of many people, and on the other hand has lost its capability to enforce itself. So Jack was talking about agreements being made and so on, but things are not being enforced. The state is not a charity. It doesn't have to ask anyone nicely to obey the law. It must enforce it. Obviously, we assume that these laws are legitimate and they've been enacted through democratic processes.
Yeah.
But when you've lost on the one hand legitimacy and on the other hand capability, it means that the extent to which you can foresee these things, prevent them, and even after the fact respond to them, now that you've identified your 12 conspirators as you do, is very difficult. It's very difficult. But as a matter of reality, in South Africa, political interest, and I'm not just talking about the burning of trucks, I mean, I'm talking about high-level political interest. The evidence is there for all of us to see, is shaped by organized crime and by economic interests. I mean, those are integrated.
Yes.
They don't, it's not a question of whether there are economic interests involved here. There are, obviously.
Obviously. Yeah, definitely. Let's leave it there for tonight, unfortunately, because of time. I appreciate you coming on and helping us in this conversation. That is, of course, David Africa. He is the Executive Director of Africa Center for Security and Intelligence. Jack Mazibuko, General Secretary of Satawu, and Philip Mukwande, United Truck Drivers Association.